We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello and welcome to Sisters Assembled, your home for all things MCU. And today we are officially talking about our predictions for the Ironheart show. Last week we double-clicked into the villain, the Hood, and this week we are looking at the show more holistically to talk a little bit about what we think might happen, where it will take Riri, which we got some good news this week potentially, and overall what we're expecting for the show. So with all that being said, I'm going to toss it over to Kate and she is going to get us started.
Let's just hit a couple housekeeping things first. We don't know the release schedule fully of this show, just so everybody knows.
As of this recording,
yes. We will try to post something like on our Instagram or something of that nature when we get there. But we don't actually fully know. We know the first 3 episodes are apparently all dropping the first night, which, okay, that's a choice. We will be covering those 3 in a bulk, but the last 3 are kind of up in the air, not really sure. We haven't gotten full confirmation if they'll come weekly after that or also in a bulk. We don't really know. So that's kind of just important to put out there so everybody's aware. Also for our sake, so you know when to expect episodes, because we don't know when to expect episodes right now either. Anyway, moving into the more fun stuff. As T kind of said, we did talk about the Hood last week, so we're going to try and avoid a little bit of getting too in-depth about him, because that was the point of last week's episode, but it's going to be important to talk about. Obviously, this is our film's villain, and the newest trailer really gave a lot of information regarding the true direction of this show, which is kind of interesting, because I felt like it actually worked against the original trailer and what it seemed to be. So we talked a lot last week about the new mystical elements because of the Hood, and it actually seems like we're going a lot more in that direction as well than I think we had even assumed as of before and when we talked about the Hood. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And with the news that Riri's possibly going to now be in Doomsday or Secret Wars or both, I think it's even more fitting that she's going to have more of a mystical element into all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that piece was what really stuck out to me as I was prepping for this episode. That new trailer and what you're specifically referencing is you can see in her suit, she is loading what looks like the same type of magic that Doctor Strange does. And that's what one of the articles also pointed out that I was reading. It looks like that type of magic. So it is cool that she is going to kind of have not only the tech, she has the brilliant mind that she has, and she's going to, build her suit that way. But then she's going to level it up with this magic, which is most likely going to come from her collaboration with the Hood. Whether that is something that she does when they are still allies, or it's something where she turns his own magic against him later, I think that's going to be a really fascinating way for her to go in a different direction to further distinguish herself from Tony Stark, because I think that's a lot of the conversation with her character as well. You know, she is his heir apparent, but she's also her own person. She is her own very intelligent character, very driven character, and you see what in the trailer. She wants to make something iconic. She wants to have her own legacy. And so I think that's another way that she can kind of put her own Riri Williams Ironheart stamp on technology that is based off of Tony's.
I agree. I also think it's kind of in a fun way the Science Bros Part 2 had a baby. Because obviously Science Bros Part 1 was Hulk and Iron Man, but now we had Iron Man and Doctor Strange, and obviously Doctor Strange is a little different. He's more of that mystical side, but it's like they had a brainchild, and that's going to be Ironheart, which I kind of like. It's
Yeah.
very fitting in its own way, but it also I think is very reminiscent of where we are at in the MCU as a whole. We like to bucketize,
Yeah.
right? Like that's our fave thing to do. We sit here and do it every time we're on this podcast. We're like ground level, no cosmic, no mystical. Like we literally do it constantly. But that is no longer where we are at. And we're learning that even with the new Avengers being a pivotal role in Doomsday. Hey, I don't think Bucky's gonna punch Doctor Doom in the face, but it's on the board now. It could happen. So I think she's a very good example of these worlds kind of colliding, and people are fitting less into specific buckets anymore because the threats are no longer fitting into specific buckets. And obviously, I think we did see an aspect of that in Infinity War and Endgame with Thanos, and we saw the different guys all come together, the different teams, if you will, come together. But I think when you have a Doctor Doom and you have incursions and you have all these things we're moving towards, Battle World, you can't be in a bucket anymore. I think that's just kind of what we're all learning is it's not easy to do that. So I do think Riri kind of moving away from just being, oh, she's another Iron Man, which is I feel like is everybody's comment, to being more of this again, weird brainchild almost of Doctor Strange and Iron Man mixed together really does encapsulate where we are in the MCU.
It totally does. And it also, I think, opens the door to conversation about exactly what you were saying, kind of in your first comment of this changes the direction of the show, because I think it at the base we have the general idea, right? Like if we're all going to go against what the trailers are saying, Riri needs cash to be able to fund her suit. She wants to be able to really level it up. Great. What how does she do that? She turns to the hood, goes through a little bit of a gray, morally gray area where she's, committing crimes likely to be able to fund that as part of what I'm assuming is the MCU's version of Hood's gang. Okay, I think we all got that. At a certain point, Riri's gonna have a come to back to herself moment where she realizes she can no longer justify these actions because in her heart she is a good person who knows the difference between right and wrong. Great. Now we move to Act 3. Act 3, she's probably going to be in contrast against the hood. I think we all kind of can lay that out at a base level. That is the overarching plot. But I think where the change comes in is that could all have been super street level, even despite kind of the hood's enhancements and his particular abilities. But knowing that she is going to level up her suit with magic, to me, signifies a few different things. One, that we're going to step way more into the magical realm than we thought, which is what you hinted at. But then going a step beyond that, what does that mean in terms of the characters that we might see in this show, whether it's small cameos or introductions? We know one of the long-standing rumors has been Sacha Baron Cohen as Mephisto in this show. Knowing, I know,
The way you work him into every single piece of content
Okay,
is
one,
crazy.
he's only in like 15%. But
Mhm.
two, that is a long-standing rumor. Like you cannot talk about predictions for this show without like if you Google the cast of this show, he comes up as Mephisto. So that is just something that the internet
What is
has
it? A
talked about.
broken clock has to be right twice a day. So I feel like it's like if you say Mephisto will be in it, one of the times you'll have to be right.
I mean, to be fair, the only other time I've ever said it was Agatha. And that made
You
sense.
have brought Mephisto into so many conversations.
All about Agatha. Anyway,
Mhm.
anyway, anyway. This one I think does make sense because of the way that we're going with the show being a little bit more mystical. We know that even though the Hood's powers are coming from Dormammu, you can make that switch if you wanted to in his origin story. I think the other thing then that brings up, speaking of Dormammu, if they keep that as his origin story, does a Doctor Strange then or a Wong make a cameo because you're dealing with their type of magic with someone who they know really well? Is it a Clea because that's her uncle? So there, I think it, and I'm not saying that those three would have a major part in the show, but I think it changes the trajectory of the types of characters who might have a stake in the show based on the direction and the emphasis.
I think it would really actually kind of shock me if we don't see Wong.
I agree.
Primarily because this man has made literal cameos in 6 different projects in phase 4 and 5 that he belongs in not at all. So I think one that I could see him actually being involved in and not seeing him would be very strange. I also think we have to remember he is the Sorcerer Supreme. So anybody messing around with magic, regardless of if it's Riri or it's the Hood, he is clocked into that. That's going to be something he's made aware of.
Yeah.
So I do think it would be strange not to see him or have even more of a reference or something that comes from him because again, Sorcerer Supreme, and this is going to be magic activating in different ways, being used in different ways, and it makes the most sense to kind of have his involvement. We really don't know what's happening with Doctor Strange since his end credit scene in MOM. I don't know. He's not even being billed as a big person in Doomsday,
Which is
so
wild.
it's
Wild.
extremely wild. So that being said, I think it would make most sense for it to be Wong. I could see him being the person that kind of pulls Riri back.
Yeah.
Because when you kind of started by talking about the 3 parts, if you will, of the show, we see in the trailers how the Hood wants he goes after Riri first.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I want you to join me. I think we can help each other. And so I think for a younger person who's looking for direction and needs things, for example, as you said, she needs money to be able to keep doing her designs. And I think too, in the newest trailer, it seems that I believe it was her stepfather has recently passed. So that makes people vulnerable. And I think he's taking advantage of that. So I do think it could be interesting to have somebody like a Wong kind of help set her straight and be like, if you're going to mess around in this realm, this is how you're going to do it. Or you're not going to mess around at all because this is my problem if you do.
Yeah, you're totally right. I think that, again, like that scene, or it's a couple of scenes really. It's one where it looks like there's someone painting the symbols of the magic, and then you see her kind of literally loading it up into the suit, and then you see her the same interface that Tony has, or a similar interface that Tony has, but hers has the magical circles. And I think that just changes so much the perspective of where this show is going. And then as I was reading more about kind of Riri and her connections in the comics, if you want to talk about kind of the intersection between magical and kind of more street level, more physical fighters, someone who's a really good embodiment of that is Shang-Chi, right? He has the 10 rings, which are a little bit more mystical, cosmic, and then he's like a total baddie, just like kicking butt. But what's interesting is Riri's dad, you mentioned her stepdad, her biological father, who she thought had died, is actually a member of the 10 Rings.
Ooh.
Yeah, she has a connection to them as well. And I think that's fascinating then when you think about maybe she talks to Wong who knows Shang-Chi, who then has obviously his sister right now is running the 10 rings. Her father's a part of that. You start to see, we talked about, in our sister Scoop, how Riri could fit into some of these larger narratives, knowing there's potential for her in Doomsday and Secret Wars. And then you start to see some of her connections to the wider universe beyond just the obvious parallels with Tony Stark. And you're like, all right, cool. Like, I could see how she can get into some of these rooms essentially with the connections she already has. I think something else that's interesting about her in the comics is she has a lot of notoriety. Like, once she becomes a superhero, she's not someone who has the Riri Williams and the Ironheart, and that those identities are not known to be the same person. People know that Riri Williams is Ironheart. So I think one thing that I'll be watching a lot in this show is, does she become as well known to the public as she is in the comics throughout this show, or is that set up for her? Because I think that's the other thing that could really impact kind of where she goes next, just knowing that that's something that happens to her in the comics.
Yeah, and I think that's where this character, for a lot of people who are like, oh, she's just Tony Stark. No. And she has these connections that, and not that Tony doesn't, but if we're looking at an MCU kind of parallel, she's already in with the Wakandans.
Mhm.
Her and Shuri are tight. We've had this happen already. She's clearly kind of going now down the mystical side of things. She could be ending up very close to a Wong, a Doctor Strange, something of that nature. She's extremely gifted, so I wouldn't be honestly too shocked if she's reached out to by anybody from the Stark Industries kind of side
Mhm.
or Avengers in general.
Yep.
Like, she's on the map.
Yeah.
And that's something Tony wasn't, and Tony was on the map in a very different way for most of his life. But until he actually became Iron Man, he was not on the map like that. She's a young, I mean, she was what, in college?
Mhm.
Like, she's really already starting to build these crazy connections. And to be able to walk around and say, like, yeah, I know the Wakandans. That you don't even need an ID. You walk right in
Yeah.
because that's crazy. And
That's an exclusive
especially,
club.
yeah, especially in the MCU.
Mhm.
So I do think the type of character she can become is actually, it is equivalent to the idea of Tony Stark being a leader, but it's actually being a leader, which I feel like Tony didn't always get to. But I do think she has the ability to really bring people together and kind of be one of those characters that fades in and out of different groups because she can. And she touches different areas and different people in general.
Yeah. And speaking of one of those groups, this is something that we also hinted at during our Sister Scoop this week, which is that in the comics, she actually is a member of the Champions team, which, if you're not familiar with the Champions, they are another superhero squad. I would say they're very similar to the Young Avengers, but a different roster. Vivian Vision is on it, for example. She's one of the members. I think there's one of the Van Dyne is on it as well, if I'm remembering correctly. And the reason that this is important and super interesting is one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about, as we know that Kamala is putting together the Young Avengers, is that they have potentially changed the name of that to Champions. That's significant because that's a different team, technically. And so, if she's a champion in the comics, it is very possible that she will then migrate over to being a part of the Young Avengers that they are assembling within the MCU, especially if, like you said, she's on people's radar. She might be on Kamala's.
Well, and I also want to add to the whole name change thing. One of the big things that kind of gives away the possibility that they will not be named the Young Avengers is the fact that they are now fighting over the Avengers name.
So, what does Avengers even mean?
Yeah, yeah. So I have a strong inkling that they're probably going to change their name to make them a little more distinctive, because I also think if Sam's willing to like low key sue his BFF over a name, I think
What's
he's
a bunch
gonna
of
be like,
kids?
yeah, he's gonna be like, that's funny. That's so funny. But also this is what the MCU does. Nothing's going to be taken by Bible. Like, we have to change things to make it work for what's already been done. Obviously not all the comics lines can be created and actually put on screen. So it wouldn't be too shocking, but like you said, she is on people's radars and I wouldn't be necessarily shocked. So I personally would like to see her go on to be more of an asset to the actual Avengers team though. I think obviously age-wise, I mean, she's right there with Kate.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be really out of the ordinary to add her into this. They're not far off from age, but again, she's extremely gifted, like intellectually gifted. That's like being like, Shuri, go on the Young Avengers.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
And did we ever question that? No, we were like, Shuri's Black Panther belongs on the Avengers team. What are we talking about? Like, it never was even brought into question. So I could see Riri more so going down that route and being like, hey, here you go. I also know Avengers wise, Sam's Avengers wise, not the new Avengers. We don't really, from what the rumors have said, have an equivalent to our Iron Man. We don't have that.
Right.
So I do think, and obviously we're not going to have an exact 6 for 6, but she could very much kind of fill that extra hole because, again, she deserves to be there.
Yeah, for sure. I think knowing that she's potentially going to have, the power of not only an extremely high tech suit, but then also maybe a little bit of mystical pieces tied to it as well. Like, I think that may elevate her out of the level of power of a young Avenger or a champion. Now, that's a little hard to say too, because then you've got Billy Maximoff, who is quite literally one of the most powerful characters in comics.
But I would argue power and intellectual slash like just I don't want to say emotional maturity, but like we all watched Billy. He's not ready to be standing there next to a Sam.
Correct.
And not because he's not more powerful than Sam. If there was a 1v1, like we know who was going to win, but they're not equal. Riri, in a different way, could hold herself very much with the adults because she's just extremely intelligent. And that just immediately matures somebody in a different aspect, I believe, in my opinion.
I don't disagree. And I think the other thing to think with Riri is she's already a little bit battle hardened. She's seen true battle when she was in Wakanda in a way that some of the other Avengers haven't, right? Like, we saw Kate, she battled Kingpin. Great. Okay. I'm not taking that away from her. Obviously, Kamala was out in space, so she's leveled up too. But I think with Riri having been in that type of intense battle the way that she was, I think she would be ready to take on the types of battles that the, for lack of better term, big Avengers are, whether that's new or copyrighted. She could easily work with any of them and hold her own, whereas some of the younger Avengers, not quite yet. I also think she wouldn't be intimidated by any of the personalities on either squad. I'm looking at Kamala, who y'all know is like, I love that girl, but she would just be fangirling the whole time, right? That level of maturity that you talked about isn't there. Riri stood next to the Queen of Wakanda. Riri stood next to the Black Panther, next to M'Baku. She fought in the same battle as Namor. These are high powered individuals, and she did not back down. She was not intimidated. She held her own. And I think that shows, to what you were saying, a level of maturity and readiness to really go for the big battles where she's not going to be afraid to go after a Doctor Doom. That doesn't phase her. She's not going to be afraid to stay next to a Sam, next to a Bucky or a Yelena, despite any of the things that they've already done and the accolades that they've accomplished. Riri doesn't care. She believes that she belongs there, and rightfully so. Some of the other kids aren't at that place yet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think kind of moving it back towards, because I feel like we're very much kind of like where the show goes after. But
Yeah.
moving it back towards the show itself, I do think, again, this second trailer or possibly last one that we get before the show actually starts to come out really to me showed why this entire thing is more important than I think anybody was believing it to be. Me included. I mean, I've said how many times that I'm like, honestly, I don't care because this character, it was introduced to me 3.5 years ago. And quite frankly, you didn't capitalize on it then. So I forgot she existed until you told me, oh, wait, yeah, by the way, we are still putting this show out. This second trailer is actually what got me more hyped for it
Yeah.
because as of right now, Marvel is still continuing to make things that relate to the bigger universe. Obviously, we know that idea is going to be changing supposedly, but that's what I expect from this type of show is to see the bigger effects of where a character is going and to have a show actually have higher stakes because of it. The Hood we talked about last week is quite the foe to be going up against by yourself for the first time. He's been an Avengers level threat in the comics. This isn't just some like willy-nilly guy from down the road. This is somebody who genuinely the Avengers eventually have to take on because he just acquires like really powerful things and starts using them.
Like the Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah, literally, literally. So I think it's such a good step to kind of be like, hey, by the way, yes, she's already done a little something, so we don't need to have just somebody random. We can give her a genuinely important foe or somebody that's going to kind of turn heads a little bit. But I also like that it opens these bigger doors to that entire discussion we just had of saying this makes her more important than maybe made out to be initially in not even just trailers, but just the way that I think sometimes things have been marketed. But it shows that like she's crossing bigger boundaries. And I think it also excites me a lot for the Hood because while we did talk about him last week, we were downplaying a lot of the mystical parts because we were like, well, Riri's going to be all tech. Well, she's not. So that being said, I think it really changes the dynamic between the two of them as well because it's no longer going to be your tech versus mystical. We see that she essentially sucks up this mystical part into all of it. Honestly, is Loki probably going to make the scariest AI that I've ever seen in my life. There you go. Tony's successor right there. Like they are in line.
Magical powered AI. What could actually be worse?
What could be worse? It's literally Ultron Vision right there.
Oh my
So,
god, stop.
yeah. Well, is it not though? Like she just didn't do it with the Infinity Gauntlet.
I don't think they're gonna make Natalie. Her AI is called Natalie, named after a friend who had passed. I don't think they're gonna make Natalie evil. I think she'll be fine, but
Yes.
it does have the potential to be that way. Yes.
Correct. And obviously I'm just joking around and kind of taking a few shots at Tony as I do, but
Who wouldn't take the opportunity?
exactly.
All the opportunities.
Exactly. But I do think it really changes the dynamic between this now protagonist and antagonist, because we thought they were playing two different games. And now they're playing the same game, which is kind of going to be a very interesting factor to bring in. But I also want to talk about his skin, which is going to sound weird because I don't know how else to kind of lead into that. But we get a shot of him where it looks like poison Loki is like spreading throughout his body, which I would assume is essentially being poisoned by the mystical cloak and boots, because don't forget the whole outfit. The cloak and boots that he wears that makes him the Hood. Hey, laugh, girl. I see you. I see you. It is. It's a set. It's a set. It was
a
very
matching
specific.
set. We know.
It's a
we
magic
know.
set. But I assume his continuous use of the abilities it gives him is actually poisoning him, which I would imagine is what makes him more and more desperate. How he screws up, how Riri goes against him, and then kind of subsequently is what that is. And while I don't want to go too far into him, I do want to kind of add the correction now that I don't think he's going to make it out of this. And if he does, he's just going to be him. Like, he will be completely stripped of the hood and it will never come back. Therefore, he will be just boring. Like, he's not going to be an interesting character to keep enough on the board for us to ever think about again.
Okay, a couple things, and I know we said we weren't going to focus on the Hood, but things happen, and
Well, we
new
have
trailers
new
come out, new
information.
footage.
Yeah.
You know what that kind of almost poison looks like? You know what it reminds me of, especially when you think about in the comics who gives him his powers? Caecilius and the ones who follow Dormammu.
Yeah.
And so in this case, knowing that, I do think it's going to be Dormammu who's going to be, we'll say, his benefactor and not Mephisto. I still think that doesn't mean Mephisto doesn't come in because, again, there are reason behind these rumors. But what is important there is, we saw how that was corrupting Caecilius, and it didn't always start out that way, right? So I think it could also be, as we're seeing Riri flirt with the dark side, it could be that she's watching Parker, aka the Hood, go through a transformation in the sense that he is becoming controlled by the Hood and not the other way around, where he is becoming more reckless, more dangerous, and putting more people at risk, going for maybe bigger and bigger targets, let's say, as an example. And that could be what kind of that, and her inner moral compass probably blaring red lights at her the whole time, only getting worse, could be the reason that she turns away from being his ally and being someone who's working with him. As to what you were saying about him not making it out, I don't know. I really hope he does, because I think he's such an interesting character who has so much potential beyond just this show to really make waves. I mean, could it be that he becomes like Mordo, where he's just someone who goes off on his own and is doing his own thing? I don't know, because I think there's an opportunity to just have him be on the back burner for a while, but come back in another film, especially if we're going to bring in a Doctor Strange 3, someone like Clea who has the connections to a Dormammu. This guy does too. I would like to see us reserve him in some way, shape, or form for another day. That's just me manifesting, but that's what I would like to see.
I think for me, it's not so much that I'd like to see it more than the direction this last trailer to me kind of came across doesn't look promising for him. And usually I feel the characters who are hiding that they're dying usually don't make it. Like it's just kind of been, and that works both ways, villain, good guy, hero, whatever, doesn't really matter, but the characters who typically hide that, oh, I got shot, or I've been dying of XYZ or whatever, are usually not the ones who we see make it very long moving forward. And I think, to go back on some of my words from last week, because again, new information, I would assume this magic is probably killing him. I just think that that's what that looks like to me, is that it's killing him the more he uses it, and or he is, kind of to what you were saying, losing himself.
Mhm.
Because something that was really highlighted in who he is he kind of is this pawn. He becomes almost this pawn. And I did highlight too that he has this ability at some point to turn into this weird like monster thing. I'm not saying we're getting that, but you know what? I don't know, because now if we're going more mystical, things could get weird out here. I don't know. All right. But I think it also could just be in general him losing him as a person and becoming more of Dormammu's pawn directly. And so I think, regardless of how this works out, I don't wish him to die, but I do think it's going to completely strip him of any magic. And therefore, I think that doesn't bring him importance anymore in the MCU. I see it just kind of being like, okay, you ran your course, we move on, because it's not what are you going to do, reunite the hood, like bring him back later on? I don't see him being enough of an important character like that anymore, especially because I do see Riri, if she utilizes the magic she gets from him, because that's what I think is going to be happening. I think, why bother? You're already going to have almost the hood's magic out there, which is also going to be interesting, because if it's from Dormammu, it's all dark magic.
Yeah, I mean, that actually ties nicely into one of the things I want to talk about, which is Riri's morally gray actions in this show. I mean, I think it's going to be so interesting to see a hero who we have seen absolutely fight for the right thing in Wakanda. She was fighting to save the Wakandans, basically with no skin in the game, right? She was just doing that to help them. Yes, they kind of did kidnap her out of her dorm room, but like she wasn't like she didn't have a stake in Wakanda surviving and making it out of that battle. She was doing it to protect people and because it was the right thing to do. So she's a good person and she's a hero. But what's going to be so fascinating to watch during this show is the way that she's going to justify blatantly unheroic actions that are illegal in order to meet her own goals. And I think that's one of the I can't think of another time where we've seen a hero go this far down.
I couldn't say this far down, but again, her predecessor is very in that direction as well.
Totally morally
I.e.,
gray.
Ultron.
Yes, yes, but like I mean like actively committing crimes. Like Tony was doing scientific research and he took it too far. I'm not justifying what he did, but it wasn't necessarily like a crime. She is actively like going to be committing crime in order to fund her research, which is a little bit of a different animal. And I'm excited to see a hero who is going to be much more relatable in the sense that like everybody has to deal with these questions of right or wrong. You have characters like Steve or Sam who are pretty much always making the right or morally just decision, right? And then you're going to have someone like Riri who is a little more like Tony in that they fall off the bandwagon every once in a while. They make mistakes. They're a little more relatable in that way. And I think that'll be really cool to see. And then also on the back end to watch her come back to herself. And you want to talk about potentially Parker losing himself. She clearly will too. And I think that that will be an important part of her story. And I think will make her a really compelling character, both in this show and as she moves forward into different properties and the future.
Yeah, and I think just with both of them, we might be getting a very, very interesting antagonist protagonist relationship.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing it, because I don't think we always get to see them. I mean, like, one example is a little bit like Mysterio Spider Man.
Hmm.
You get to see them fight together, you get to see them be the good guys together. And then obviously we find out who is not the good guy. And it all ends up having to culminate, and Spider Man has to do what he has to do and everything else. But I don't think we get to see that trope very often, where it's, I mean, actually, OG Iron Man, but like, either way, it's not done often. Off the top of my head, I've named two that I know of for sure. But like, I think this could be a very interesting one, because to what you said, there is a lot more of these lines that she is willing to cross in agreement with him, because she has things that she wants to achieve. And is that not what makes a villain half the time, is that they're willing to cross the lines that a hero says, "No, I'm not willing to do that." So, and obviously at the end of the day, Spider-Man and Mysterio in that example, he was tricked. He was made to feel like he wasn't a good hero, and in doing so, and he's a kid
Mhm.
in that movie. He sat there and made a different choice, but he didn't cross a line.
What he did wasn't a crime. It
No.
wasn't illegal. He got manipulated into giving away technology to someone he thought could do it better.
Exactly. Well, in this case, I truly do see more of that ability to cross that line and have to learn to come back. And when you throw in these mystical elements, I mean, really, when you throw in technology and mystical elements, regardless of them being together, both of those on their own, you can cross really powerful lines
Yes.
that are hard to come back from. But now you have them both in here. And so I do think this relationship is one I'm looking forward to because I hope it's going to be well written enough that it's like Kingpin and Daredevil.
That's what I was going to say. That's such a good example because they don't really work together. Occasionally you'll see them almost be on the same side like when they're going against Bullseye, for example, in the 3rd season of the original Netflix show. That's one example, but like they are such intertwined characters that anything that one does reflects on the other and they're mirrors. And I think this could be the same or a similar opportunity to what you were saying. She's going to have her moments of crisis of not really a crisis of faith, but like almost a loss of faith in herself that she feels like she has to cross these lines. He's potentially losing himself to an interdimensional like demon thing. They're both dealing with stuff and they're going to work together until they come to very different conclusions about how to potentially move forward and how to what is right and what is wrong. I'm excited for both the relationship when they're working together and the fallout because I think they're both going to be fascinating to watch as these two very ambitious, driven individuals attack a problem both together and against each other.
Exactly. I think it's going to be a very interesting relationship that we see. And I already kind of thought it would be because, again, he's essentially manipulating her at the start to get her to join him. But then she kind of likes it. She likes the reward, essentially, of what, they're doing. So I do think kind of all of this storytelling and character development is going to be a very, very strong story if it's told well. Obviously, we'll find out. We don't know how it's been written. We don't know how it's going to go. We always have our qualms about the shows because 6 episodes never ever hit 6 for 6. So we will see, but I do think at least the relationship that we're getting from the trailers is solid.
I would agree. I think I have talked about everything that I want to talk about, knowing that we had the previous episode. Definitely check that out if you want a little bit of a deep dive on the hood. As we mentioned, some of it's a little outdated now that new trailers have come out, but Katie's given me the thumbs up on her side. So we will see you all on the other side of 3 episodes of Ironheart. We're going to have a special episode that'll be in a video format. So if you're watching us or listening to us on YouTube, you will actually get to see us do that. So that'll be super exciting. Make sure that you're following on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, or any place that you can find your podcast. We will be hitting Ironheart reactions hard next episode. Please check out the website. Anything that you need to find around the podcast should be up on there. And last but not least, if you're enjoying the show, you can check out our Buy Me a Coffee link, which is down below if you'd like to help support.
You guys can also follow us on all of our social platforms, which are in the show notes as well below. And as Taylor kind of said, we will be reacting to the first 3 episodes of Ironheart next week. So join us for that. And until then, Marvel just blew your mind. So let's talk about it.